Hey guys, we've got a lot to cover in the stream, a lot more than I thought was going to come out of these first four chapters alone. And boy, was I right. Charles Lyell is everywhere in these first four chapters. So we're going to go over that in just a second. But without further ado, just get into it. That little intro every time. It's really fun. All right, so we'll go over a few updates on the channel. First one is that I am on nearly every social media now. So you can find me on Facebook, on X, on Blue Sky, on TikTok, on Instagram, and I am updating my post schedule so that I will be doing like a written post every other day, and then in between those, I will be doing a video post or a short. So you can find those written posts on like Facebook, X, Discord. I am publishing my Discord. I'll get that out in just a second, but I'll include the links to all these down below, and Reddit. So you can find those on those uh, four social medias, and then my videos are everywhere else. So I'm also trying a new thing out, which you guys probably saw yesterday. I'm trying to do something called a Timely Thursday. I'm calling it Timely Thursday, which is basically going over a new scientific discovery in the field of evolution, or just in science in general, as long as it sort of pertains to evolution. And those will be coming out on Thursdays. I know the last one came out on Friday, but I'll try to get them on Thursdays. The last one was on Optovolution, if you guys saw that. And then the next thing is, over the summer, I'm going to be taking sort of a break because I am going to be at a youth ministry that is going to be kind of out of the way, off grid. So I don't know how much Wi Fi access I'm going to have. So I'll be taking a little bit of a break during those months, and we'll pick it back up with our streams in August. And I think that is everything. So I have a little I got to go to this really cool, really big uh plane plane um air air aerospace thing the other day, and I wanted to show you guys a little teaser video of what I got footage wise there. So without further ado, I'll show you that. We just got an interview with this guy at Sun and Fun, of all places, who's read Charles Lyell. Probably the only other person on Earth that has read Charles Lyell. It was such a fun, insightful conversation, and I just got to talk to him for a while. It makes me want to read Charles Lyell again, honestly, because I didn't quite get to the whole book, so we might be going back there. Stay tuned. Yeah, that was a very fun conversation that I got to have with Dean, actually. So yes, that was just a amazing conversation, and really what this channel stands for is to have open conversations about evolution, about the hard things, about theology even, and just do it in a way that's respectful, and we can just have civil discourse. So that was a really fun, insightful conversation, and I will be posting the whole interview as well as a more in-depth video on Sun and Fun later this week. We actually went there, Sun and Fun, to well, to see the planes and the amazing air show that they do, but also to kind of I brought my interview stuff to get an interview with the head of NASA who was flying a plane there. I was trying to get an interview with him and talk to him about the Artemis 2 launch a little bit so that you guys could get a little bit more on that. Um, and I was actually there at the Artemis 2 launch, watching it go up. I watched it in person. And if you guys want any footage on that, I can send you guys some of that. I might put it in the Sun and Fun video actually. So stay tuned for that video. It'll be coming out sometime this week. Okay. As with always, I'm going to go over my bias and my viewpoints so that you guys just know them. And I'm going to be doing that in front of, like, at the beginning of every stream so that if anyone new is coming, they know where I'm coming from. And it's just good to say those and make a habit of saying what your bias is and realizing you have your own bias and viewpoints. So, I am a Christian. I believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God. I'm a creationist. I do not have solid views on the age of the earth. I lean more towards young earth, but I can see some arguments for a biblical old earth. So those are my bias and my viewpoints. I might shorten those down so you guys don't have to hear those every single stream, but I will be saying them every single. Okay. So let's go. We're going to get into Charles Darwin and onto the origin of species, but let's hear a little more background. Let's set up a little bit of background about who this guy is and what he did. So, Charles Darwin began his journey into discovering or creating his theory of evolution, not where you might expect. Some people would say that it was on the HMS Beagle, but it actually began in his studies at Edinburgh University. There, he was exposed to naturalist thoughts that the world that would shape the rest of his life. In Edinburgh, Darwin was introduced to the latest continental sciences. He was also exposed by some of the more radical students to ideas like humans not being divinely designed and instead sharing all of their characteristics, including intellect, with animals. This is quite a radical theory for the day, and even up to the time when Darwin himself is presenting these ideas, it was still quite radical. Um, and of course, it's not considered radical anymore. In fact, one of the discussions he attended at Edinburgh was officially censored because it was considered subversive for its materialism. Here, he also met the evolutionist Robert Edmund Grant, who taught him about the relationships and growth of marine invertebrates. These invertebrates, Grant believed, held the secrets to more complicated forms of life. And this led Darwin to do some studies of his own on invertebrates and invertebrate zoology. From here, Darwin's father sent him, well, he first had sent him to Edinburgh, and now he sends him to a more Christian school, which is not a Christian school anymore, Cambridge. Here, he was exposed to more conservative views on botany. This is also where he was offered the chance to board the HMS Beagle, which, as we know, was quite um, foundational in his uh, formation of the theory. This led Darwin to start making his own observations on different geology structures, actually. And this was also where he got his first edition of the Principles of Geology, and it was the first edition of the Principles of Geology. As we know, and as I shared last stream, Lyles was a prolific writer, and he published 12 versions of the same book. So this was actually the first edition that Darwin was reading, and that was the one that I read, and we were doing the stream on last what was that? Last month. So this is the same exact stuff that I was sharing to you on the last stream. His journey on the Beagle did not immediately form the theory of evolution, and he did not form the theory of evolution on the HMS Beagle really at all. It was more about cementing his ideas about uniformitarianism, which came from his reading of the principles of geology. He observed the very same phenomena that Lyell wrote about, which, as we know from the last stream, was the idea that there's these shells, these unexplainable shells that are found everywhere in the strata that we just find them, and they're even embedded in mountains. So he was finding the same type of phenomena with the shells being everywhere and even embedded in mountains, which led him to believe that the Earth is, like Lyle was saying, slowly changing and morphing over time, and led him to believe uniformitarianism. Sailing from island to island and observing the hillsides and volcanic areas, he noticed the very same shells that had brought Lyle to the conclusion of uniformitarianism. He even got some of, like, this is written, all of this, by the way, comes from the Encyclopedia Britannica, but even got to witness some of the effects firsthand when he was on an island and there was an earthquake and it visibly moved the beach up a little bit so that the shells were no longer in the surf, but were actually on dry land now. So this really convinced him that Lyle was onto something, that Lyle had correctly formed the theory of uniformitarianism, and that was the truth. That was how geology was formed over time. And this is what led this, and thinking in terms of deep time, because if you believe in uniformitarianism, if you believe in these things, it inevitably leads you to think in terms of deep time, is eventually what led to his theory of evolution, which makes sense. If you think about many of the ideas presented in evolution, a lot of them are kind of like uniformitarianism in the way that they are just something acting the same rate over a massive period of time. So that is that is what set up his theory. That is what set up his formulation of the theory. And then we're going to move into what he actually writes. So, um, let's go to The Origin of Species. In his introduction, Charles writes what is the foundations of his theory on page 14. I am fully convinced that species are not immutable, but that those belonging to what are called the same genera are lineal descendants of some other and generally extinct species, in same manner as the acknowledged varieties of any one species are the descendants of that species. Furthermore, I am convinced that natural selection has been the most important part, but not the exclusive means of modification. So that is basically the the basis, the foundation of the theory of evolution. That natural selection selects and makes these modifications, and that the term species is not immutable. That you can go from one species to another, you can go from one genus to another. Okay, so there are two things that evolution really relies on that have to be true for evolution to be true, and that is there must be variation, and for macroevolution, there must be deep time. And both of these things Darwin had observed, and both of these things Darwin agrees with. So, on page 108, he writes, unless favorable variations be inherited by some at least of the offspring, nothing can be affected by natural selection. And on page 122, he says, but these breaks, which were at 10,000 generations, are imaginary and might have been inserted anywhere after intervals long enough to allow the accumulation of considerable amount of divergent variation. So those are the foundational truths, that the foundational things that have to be true in order for evolution to have any grounding at all. That there is variation among species, and that there is long ages, there is deep time. There's enough time for this to happen. So that is, I need to stop saying so. That's a lot of so's. There, this is what he starts to build on in his first 4 chapters. The first 2 chapters are about there being variation, and that's you can observe that domestically. We can see that there's breeds, and that breeding diverges different species, that you can see distinct breeds. And in chapter 2, he talks about how there is variation in nature, that under a natural state animals would tend to vary anyways, which seems kind of intuitive, but was not for the time. People thought that, oh, once we pick out an species to just breed and we domesticate them, then they suddenly obtain the ability to vary. And Darwin kind of points out, no, this doesn't make sense. So, in the first chapter, Darwin lays out the most crucial part of his theory, that there is variation among animals in the same species, and that variation can happen under natural conditions alone. In the first chapter, he lays out the facts that human selection and breeding have been practiced for a long time and certainly produce varieties. Some of this he did himself, for he was a fancier of pigeons, and his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, who had wrote about a little bit about evolutionary thought, was an agriculturist, and he developed different variations of his. I forget what it was. I think it was peas that he was growing, but he developed different variations of that. In the second chapter, Darwin goes over how this occurs in nature. He defines species, breeds, and variations as we saw in that one truth, that there was somewhat of a discrepancy when he was talking about how variations and breeds are kind of hard to define, and he points out that this is because, as he writes, because of natural selection and evolution, that these that varieties and species are very hard to define because they are so similar and they are continually becoming each other. And that was one of his proofs for evolution. But I'm going to get to. Oh, wait, yes. Later, he points out how the lack of clarity builds his point, and that is on page 62. So I'll just read that for you. Where many species of a genus have been formed through variation, circumstances have been favorable for variation, and hence we might expect that the circumstances would generally still be favorable to variation. On the other hand, if we look at each species as a special act of creation, there is no apparent reason why more varieties should occur in a group having many species than in having few. So he's saying that basically, if there is variation and it forms new species, this this would explain um our tax why our definition of species and our definition of variety are so um confusing, so vague. He shows how anytime we begin to observe more about a species, we find closely allied varieties. A funny remark comes from page 56, where he kind of says this in a more sarcastic tone, which is just hilarious. I have been struck with the fact that if any animal or plant in a state of nature be highly useful to man, or from any closely cause closely attracts his attention, varieties of it will almost universally be recorded. These varieties, moreover, will often be ranked by some authors as species. So yeah, it's just kind of a funny remark pointing out that, yeah, once we domesticate it, it gets varieties for some reason. We don't know why, but in nature it doesn't. Why is this the case? He then builds out how the varieties, there being varieties in nature, causes macroevolution on page 59, and I'll read that for you. Hence, I look at individual differences through though a small interest to the systematist, as the highest importance for us, as being the first step towards such slight variations as are rarely thought worth recording in works on natural history. And I look at varieties which are in any degree more distinct and permanent as steps toward more strongly marked and permanent varieties, and at the later as leading to subspecies and then to species. Oh, what the heck? Why did my camera pop out? Technical difficulties, guys. I don't know what just happened. Let me replug it in. I'm guessing you guys can still hear me. But sec. Can you see me now? Good? Okay. Okay. I think we went over extensively how um varieties are formed, how there are varieties in both nature and under domestication. The second point that he goes on to make is the foundations for natural selection even taking root, and that is the struggle for existence. In chapter 3, Darwin builds out how species are in constant competition, which is the backbone for natural selection. First, he explains that every animal increases at a geometric rate, and they cannot all be sustained. And that is on page 72. There's no exception to the rule that every organic being naturally increases at so high a rate that if not destroyed, the earth would soon become covered by the progeny of a single pair. And this is just observable. We can see this with almost everything. There are so many. If you even think about like bugs or something like that, if you think about a spider who has a spider's nest that is just insane amount of little spiders, you would understand that, yeah, there's definitely way more being born that then can possibly be sustained by nature. And that leads to some being killed off and some making it to the end. This leads to checks and balances which cause the winner to live and the loser to die. He then explains how complicated these checks and balances can be. Page 79. Hence, if certain insectivorous my gosh. Hence, if certain insectivorous birds were to decrease in Paraguay, the parasitic insects would probably increase, and this would lessen the number of the navel frequenting flies. Then cattle and horse would become feral, and this would certainly greatly alter, as indeed I have observed in parts of South America, the vegetation. This again would largely affect the insects, and this, as we have just seen in Staffordshire, the insectivorous birds, and so onwards in an ever increasing circles of complexity. Not that under nature the relations will ever be as simple as this. Whenever something changes whenever something is affected in an equilibrium, it just kind of changes the whole thing, and then it kind of finds this new equilibrium, and then it just goes again. So what we see is that nature is so complex. If we even change one little thing, it could lead to cascading spirals that we would have never saw before. Even even just up to like little things like even changing a protein in a cell a protein in anything can just completely throw out of whack the whole system. Not the whole system of a uh, environment, but I mean the whole system of a living creature. Okay. Finally, the most important point of this chapter is that the battle is most severe among varieties of the same species, and I will get to why this is important in just a second. But this is on page 82. As the species of the same genus usually have, though by no means invariably, much similarity in habits and constitution, and always in structure, the struggle will generally be more severe between them if they come into competition with each other than between the species of distinct genera. And this just makes intuitive sense. If two animals act the same way, eat the same things, then they're naturally going to compete for that food more often than they're going to compete with something that doesn't eat the same food and doesn't act the same ways as them. So this is just kind of an intuitive thing. When something acts like you, acts like you, lives in the same areas as you, eats the same things as you're more likely to come in contact with them and compete with them than you are something that is completely different. And this is very important for the theory of natural selection because this is what produces varieties. The competition is what produces varieties, and that is why there's many varieties in a genus that is large and has many species, because these species are so close in form that they compete with each other and produce more varieties. Finally, in chapter 4 on natural selection, Darwin goes over how winners are built, how these winners of the race for life, of the competition, the ones that are going to live, are built, how in nature a winner is decided, and what goes into making him a winner. And that is on page 87. Can it be thought improbable, seeing that variations useful to man have undoubtedly occurred, that other variations useful in some way to each being in the great complexity in the battle of life should occur in the cause of many successive generations? If such do occur, can we doubt, remembering that many more individuals are born than can possibly survive, that individuals having any advantage, however slight, over others would have the best chance of surviving and procreating their kind? And this is the whole theory of natural selection, that something that has a useful adaptation, a useful mutation, basically, a useful trait, is going to be selected, is going to win the battle of life over something that doesn't. If anything gives that animal a slight um, advantage over any of the other animals allied to it, it's going to win. It's going to um, live its full life and generate offspring, which is the most important part, to give its traits to its offspring. This winner is best adapted, but how do they adapt? And this is on page 89 and 90. Under nature, the slightest differences of structure or constitution may well turn the nicely balanced scale in the struggle for life, and so be preserved. How fleeting are the wishes and efforts of man, how short is his time, and consequently how poor will be his results compared with those accumulated by nature during whole geological periods, which is that there needs to be deep time to make these results happen. In such cases, slight modifications which in any way favored the individuals of any species by better adapting them to their altered conditions would tend to be preserved, and natural selection would have free scope for the work of improvement. So that that in a nutshell is the whole basis of these first four chapters, is setting up the definition of natural selection, how things are varied under nature, how different species are formed, in um how they become different species, but how they are selected out of all of the very many um random variations that you get in any animal to select the right ones that will help that animal survive. Summary of this chapter, which I will read for you, basically puts it all into perspective for us. If under change if under changing conditions of life, organic beings present individual differences in almost every part of their structure, and this cannot be disputed if there be, owing to their geometrical rate of increase, a severe struggle for life at some age, season, or year, and this certainly cannot be disputed, then considering the infinite complexity of the relations of all organic beings to each other and to their conditions of life, causing an infinite diversity in structure, constitution, and habits to be advantageous to them, it would be a most extraordinary fact if no variations had ever occurred useful to each being's own welfare, in the same manner as so many variations have occurred useful to man. But if variations useful to any organic being ever do occur, assuredly individuals thus characterized will, from the strong principle of inheritance, uh, these will tend to produce offspring similarly characterized. And that is it. That's the whole theory of natural selection, is that certain animals win this battle for life and that they are selected for because they win, because they didn't die, and they get to produce their offspring which share those characteristics. And as I said, this is only due to the two facts that there is variation and that there is long enough times for these effects to take place, for these changes to take place, for these new varieties to be formed. In any case, this is very much like what we saw with Charles Lyell and his theory of uniformitarianism. Everything acts at a constant rate, basically. Everything is constantly changing, and this is basically a the idea behind uniformitarianism is that you can extrapolate this back in time, you can extrapolate this forward in time, and it's always kind of a constant rate. And this is what is happening here in evolution. Basically, we can see these adaptations happening. We can see this micro evolution that's happening. We can see that there's different changes that are occurring and that they are being selected by natural selection and thus changing that species, making it a new variety. And what Darwin does with this is he takes the uniformitarianism type of idea and extrapolates that back and then says that because of this, there's no um there's no objection to saying that macroevolution, that species can change into other species. There's no objection to that because it just we can see that this happens. So if we just look at that, like extrapolate that, what does that mean if we go back in time? That would mean that these things slowly diverge until they are no longer species. They are no longer able to breed. They are now two different species. And then it could go further and further and further until now they're so different that they constitute two different genuses. And then it could go further and further and further. And is what that is the uniformitarianism idea that I was saying was so influential to Charles Darwin, and it all came from Charles Lyell, was this idea that that you can extrapolate this back and forward, and that there's no change, which in and of itself is a sort of assumption. We're assuming that we can just kind of push that all the way back, we can push it all the way forward. We're assuming that everything kind of has a constant rate. But I'm I mean, there's no problem with assuming this. It's just that we got to recognize that this is a sort of assumption here. That there is an assumption that, oh, just because we can observe this means if we extrapolate that, this will happen. It's not guaranteed that that will happen. It's not guaranteed that things always act the same way. So we just need to recognize that this is an assumption. It's not necessarily that it's wrong. I'm not saying anything about whether it's wrong or right. In fact, I wasn't really uh, wanting to talk on macroevolution much in this stream, but I did want to make that point real quick, was that uniformitarianism is the idea that kind of shaped much of what Darwin was thinking here, and we can see this very much on his journey on the HMS Beagle, was much more about cementing those ideas, the ideas of deep time, the idea of uniformitarianism in his mind, than was actually making evolutionary thought. Evolutionary thought was already there. He just took it and made it into what it is today. He wrote about it. He basically was the first one to propose the idea as a formal idea. But there was evolutionary thought already going around, as we see with Erasmus, as we see with the different radical students that he was around. But what really happened on the HMS Beagle was him learning that there is deep time, that there is this, we can extrapolate this back, we can make these assumptions to say these things. And that was basically what was happening on the HMS Beagle, and that was what eventually brought him to the theory of evolution. And again, I'm not saying that any of these assumptions are wrong to make. I'm just saying we have to recognize that that these are assumptions. We will get we will get into macroevolution more on the next stream, which is over the next 4 chapters, and this is the next 4 chapters are basically a defense and a broadening of what he means by natural selection, of what he is talking about when he talks about evolution. Okay. Um, I have so these streams structures are a little weird because I wanted to do, as I pointed out in my uh channel trailer, I wanted to do a section on every stream that had two different viewpoints on this certain topic. But natural selection is not disputed at all because it's just kind of intuitive. It's not disputed at all. So I'm not going to find anything that disputes natural selection because it's not disputed. So I was going to, in these first couple streams that are on basically the basics of evolution, this is not going to be the case. I'm not going to find things that are disputing much of these ideas because they are pretty solid. But so for these next couple streams, I won't have this section, but I will begin to have it in the future when we start moving into more present day findings. So just be on the lookout for that, I guess. I'll I will not have them until August when I come back and start doing streams in August, is what I'm trying to say. Anyways, I did bring the modern view of natural selection. This is also the modern view of macroevolution, but I wanted to put it in a natural selection, as according to natural selection for right now. Darwin's original hypothesis has undergone extensive modification and expansion, but the central concepts stand firm. Studies in genetics and molecular biology, fields unknown in Darwin's time, have expanded the occurrences of hereditary variations. They're heredit- hereditary variations that are essential to natural selection, and that comes from the National Academy of Science. So, without further ado, I think that was all I had to get to. That was a lot shorter than I thought it was going to be. Anyways, if you guys have any questions, you can ask those. I am going to be publishing my stream notes, although it's not much. I will be publishing it on Facebook. My stream notes for the Charles Lyell stream was published on Facebook a couple days ago. If you guys want to go back and read those. Um basically, I'm just trying to make everything that I'm saying so you guys can kind of go see what I'm referencing, and I'm not just spewing things at you and you don't understand at all what I'm talking about. So, yeah, that's I'm gonna be doing that. If you guys have any questions, this is the question segment. You guys can ask those now if you want to, and I guess I'll just wait for 10 minutes and then we'll wrap up the stream. I guess Dean, are you still watching? I don't know. Think he is. They're still watching. We'll see. Anyways, in the next stream, I'm going to be going over that stream is going to be 2 weeks from now. I'm going to be going over the next 4 chapters and I'll kind of read the chapter titles out for you so we kind of know what we're talking about. The next 4 chapters are on get to the thing. All right, the next 4 chapters are on the laws of variation, the difficulties of his theory, miscellaneous objections to the theory of natural selection, and instinct. Those 4 chapters I'm going to be going over on, what is that, April? No, it's May 2nd, I think. Is that right? Let me look at this. Yeah, May 2nd. So stay tuned for that stream. I will probably put the plan out for that stream or whatever up on the 25th so that it's going to be up on my main page. I did I did not know you could even had a homepage until my brother fixed that for me this like an hour before the stream. I was like, "What? You can schedule streams to be just sitting there on your homepage and I don't have to like, just start it?" And he's like, "Yeah, I would have set this up what 2 weeks ago." So, I will be setting that up on the 25th so that you guys can see it and get to it easier than the stream, which was kind of last second. Does anyone have any burning questions? Yeah, I'm kind of confused. I thought I had a lot more going on, but sorry. I I hope you guys understand what natural selection is now. I don't think you really needed education on that, but this is what we're going to just like build the foundation of what evolution even is. So we all know what we're talking about. We all know we are all under the same definitions of things and definitions of natural selection, definitions of evolution, definitions of science, which, as you know, was something that I posted on very recently. Okay, without further ado, we're gonna end the stream. All right, so I will see you guys on the 2nd, and I will bring a little bit more for that one. I am sorry that this was not long enough. I will bring a little bit more for that one, so stay tuned. May 2nd, the stream thing will open up on April 25th, so you guys can sit in it for a week if you want to. I don't really care. Okay. Without send you to the outro. Bye.